All right, everybody, welcome. It is the 15th of April, 2025. I'm Stephen Murphy, the University of Waterloo, and also the person that chairs the Center for Applied Sciences in Ontario Protected Areas, otherwise known by the cute sort of, name Casiopa, shades of Greek mythology, misspelled. Um, we're going to have a really great sort of little workshop and sort of question and answer period and discussion as much as we can. I'm going to turn the process over to Dr. Jeff Bowman in a moment here, who will sort of lead us through the process. For those of you at all interested in sort of anything to do with great advances in how we look at connectivity and protected areas, and well, there's a whole host of things we can look at. This is the time to actually see this. This is a fantastic exercise that is more or less been recently concluded, but there's been publications coming out of this and other similar efforts from Jeff's shop, and I really just am in awe about this whole thing. And I'm old. I usually don't get awed very easily, but so here we are. Without further ado, I am going to mute myself and I will turn my camera off and turn it over to Jeff. I will, of course, monitor everything going on. If anybody has any sort of thing they can't hear or see, do let me know. I'll monitor the chat as well. And I'll go from that. Without further ado, Jeff, I'll let you take over.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for people who've joined the call. I'm going to share my screen right now. Okay. Just going to get my slides. Okay.
Okay, Jeff, just let you know, other people may see it. We still got the black bars at the top and the right on the screen.
Okay, so
It's more or less vanished on the thing. We can see your note. Well, we can see your notes next
yeah,
slide too.
it's in presenter view. Just give me one quick
No
second.
problem, my friend.
Yeah.
I just like to let the presenter know what we're seeing.
Okay. Hang on a second. Apologies, folks.
No, no problem. You're amongst friends here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you're doing this for free. I mean, come on. So am I. But I mean, it's all good.
Okay.
For folks listening to this and recording, I'm just going to pause the recording while we let Jeff get started, settled here, and we'll resume when we're all ready. And we're back.
Okay, apologies for the delay there. I had to just change some settings on my computer. So thanks again very much for the attention today. I'm going to talk to you about landscape connectivity, and in particular about a protected areas project that I've been involved with, along with Paul O'Brien, who has helped a lot with this project and is I think in the audience, and some um, some colleagues from Ontario Parks. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about how um, uh, landscape connectivity can impact population persistence and how it's important to consider that in the context of parks and protected areas. And so really we're interested in ensuring that different parks are connected and trying to measure and evaluate how that changes over time potentially. So we have taken an approach called resistance modeling to this question. So we use this resistance modeling technique, which I'm going to describe in some detail. And uh, we start with what's called a cost surface. So a cost surface is really just a simple way to do to kind of convey the landscape from the perspective of some animal in question. I'm giving you just a kind of a simple schematic here, wherein from the perspective of this bison, the red pixels are high cost, or pardon me, the red pixels are low cost, and these blue pixels are high cost. So there's two costs in this landscape, and you can infer the cost based on your knowledge of bison ecology in this example. It's a species-specific construct that these costs. And so then we can populate a raster of these costs. So we have some things are high cost, some things are low cost. And when we put that all into a two-dimensional map, it looks something like this. And this is called a cost surface or a resistance surface. And this is just a kind of background because we use these concepts in the work that I'm going to talk about. So in this particular two-dimensional raster, all of the red are low costs and all of the blue are high costs. So if we wanted to consider the costs to move from one location, a source, to the other location, a destination, we could call that, we could measure that with just Euclidean distance. So that's just as the crow flies, as they say, the distance from one spot to the other. We could also use something that's a little bit more informed about the costs, and that's called the least cost path. And that's something that should be probably familiar to people. That's going from basically following the optimal route from one location to the other. So in this example, if the cost is high enough, it's worthwhile for the organism in question to deviate around the high cost and take what would be the optimal route. There are some limitations of the least cost path in the context of connectivity modeling because it makes the assumption that organisms can know and follow the optimal route. And in many cases, they won't know. They won't have perfect knowledge of the landscape and be able to make the optimal decision. Also, this only really allows for one path, when in fact, there could be multiple paths that are taken. So to try and address those limitations, there's another model that is a bit more recent in development that has been used, and that is called circuit theory, which produces a probabilistic map. So we're talking about uh, a, a situation where any pixel on this map could be transited by an organism going from one location to the other. So you end up with a higher probability in the red areas there on the map, but you could technically have some organism that goes through those blue areas down in the bottom of the map, although the probability would be lower. And so we refer to this as current density. And it's basically the density of electrical current flowing across this raster is the way to think about it. And it's proportional to the probability of movement during a random walk between two nodes. That's what the current density is. And this is a derived from the analogous relationship between animals traveling across a landscape and electricity traveling through a circuit. So we take advantage of this analogy and make the assumption of a random walk, and we can use the well-known properties of electrical circuits to model animal movement. And that's kind of the basis of the work that I'm going to talk to you about. There's another um, there's another just moving this bar somewhere out of the way. There's another measure that we're interested in, which is called effective resistance. And that's a pairwise measure of the cost to travel between two nodes. And so this is not a mappable quantity like current density. It's another type of output from circuit theory. It's a pairwise measure that you might think of as a cost-weighted distance. It's important to recognize there are these two different distinct types of measures that come from circuit theory. There's the mapped quantity called current density, and then there's the cost-weighted distance, which is pairwise, and it's called effective resistance. We're going to talk about both of these as we go through this presentation. Okay, so there's a couple of other kind of technical points that I want to just convey. First is that there is the kind of context where we're connecting 2 points. We refer to as point-to-point connectivity. It's basically just as you see here, these two nodes are being connected. Um, there are situations where you don't know where the start and end locations are that you would like to map. And so in that context, you might use something called omnidirectional connectivity, where you're moving the nodes outside of the map. So in this case, you don't have nodes in the map. You don't really want to bias your map with respect to node location. You're looking for a more kind of general map of movement probability across the landscape without respect to the start and the source and destination. And so that's when we use omnidirectional connectivity, and we connect all of these nodes out in the perimeter of the map, usually in a buffer, and we randomly connect all pairs, and that leads to what we call omnidirectional connectivity. Okay, so now I want to specifically talk about three technical developments that allow us to make large maps, like the Pan-Canadian map that I'm going to talk about. Um, one development is that because a country like Canada is very large and it can lead to computer processor limitations, you might need to use map tiles. And so we've done a bunch of work to show that you can stitch together tiles to make a seamless map. So you don't need to run your map across the whole country or whatever the large area is that you're interested in. You can stitch together tiles. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The other thing is that current density is not sensitive to absolute costs if the rank order of the costs is maintained. So that's an important thing because we don't always know the absolute costs. And so it can be kind of limiting to us if um, we needed to know the absolute cost. But if you can accurately rank the costs, you can still proceed with these analyses because the absolute value of the costs do not really impact current density, if that's the measure that you're after. Okay. Finally, I want to just say that the map edge can be problematic, and so you have to be careful about dealing with the map edge. Sometimes you don't have an edge. You don't have a equivalent mapping data at the edge of your mapped area. Or you may be working with something that's got an irregular shape, and you need to consider that because those map edges can cause like biased estimates of resistance because the random walk may run into the map boundary. And so you can deal with that by using just fake data in a buffer. So you can either use real data in a buffer, or you can even just generate fake data as long as you have a buffer and something to deal with the map edge. So those are three things that are relevant to our methods, and I just wanted to briefly explain them so you can sort of understand some features of the work. Now, I'm going to just give you one quick example from Eastern Ontario, some work that colleagues and I did in 2014. And this is just an example to show you generally the methods that I've described and I'm going to get into in more detail. So here we're working in Eastern Ontario in a couple of eco-districts, and we've placed a buffer around these eco-districts, which is to help deal with the map edge. And then we are using a kind of naturalness approach here because this corresponds at this time. We were working on natural heritage planning, and this naturalness method is allowing us to construct a multi-species cost surface that accounts for a bunch of species, terrestrial species that use natural cover. So that is what we did in this example, and we have further kind of developed this concept and methods in the more recent work that I'm going to talk about. But in this example, there are three costs. There's natural cover, there's what we would call unnatural but permeable. So that would be the middle cost, which would be something like a golf course, say, for example, and then impermeable, which would be, urban or highways and that sort of thing. So there are three costs on this map. So here we have a cost surface. It's basically a two-dimensional raster. There's a buffer. The part that we're interested in is inside the buffer. It's where those two eco districts are. Okay. And so now we have this area. We connect node pairs across this. So we randomly place nodes around the perimeter of the buffer. And so in this example, we just have a couple of nodes connected, and you can see that there's the bright yellow areas are areas of highest current, and there's like electrical flow across these nodes. And we can add a couple more. And you can see as we're adding node pairs, the mean current density in the map is sort of fluctuating around. And as we add more node pairs, it's variable. And there's a kind of over time, this kind of regression to the mean type of thing that happens, and it stabilizes. And the more node pairs you add, the mean current density on the map doesn't change anymore. And we've arrived at this point at a kind of stable, multi-species, omnidirectional connectivity map of Eastern Ontario. And then you can take your buffer and clip it off, and the mapped area is the inside area. You can see down here on the bottom where there were some nodes that are over the water, you can see there's this high current density in these areas around the nodes. And that's why we want to move the nodes out of the mapped area. Yes, so that's an example. And just to show you how this looks on the landscape. So here is another just example, and this is around Uxbridge. And this is just a kind of you can see here that there are woodlots and some riparian areas around this region, and we've got some connectivity analysis through this area, and we can take, in this example, everything that is more than one standard deviation above the mean current density, and that's what this green is. So you can see the areas of high current density in green, and we can place that on the map, and you can see where basically the current in this analysis is flowing through these woodlots in the way that you might expect. I'd like to show this example though, because right under the Uxbridge label in this area, you can see that there's a large woodlot, relatively speaking, and it doesn't have a lot of the high current density. And that's important to understand because in large contiguous tracts of habitat, you end up with the current kind of spilling out, and it's not pinched in the same way. And so you tend not to get high current density necessarily. Your highest current density areas will be places where there's pinching of the current. So it's constricted in some way. It's really in close proximity to high cost areas. Really, the highest current density tends to be in proximity to high cost. And so that's an important thing to consider. As it gets into this larger tract, it spills out a bit. So that's an important feature of these maps to understand. Okay. Now I want to have another little case study, and perhaps we can have some discussion about this one. If anybody has questions or comments, I'm gonna have a question for you through this this example. So this is a raster that was made in Excel, okay? And this is just for the purpose of this example, and I'm using it just to make the point that you could use Excel if you wanted to for these analyses, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. But in this example, it's a landscape. This yellow, all these yellow cells are matrix cells, and this gray is a road, okay? I'm going to zoom in a second where you can see the cost. These green cells are the nodes. So there are 4 nodes in this map. And these pink cells have a cost of 10, and they are what you might call habitat. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. So you can see the road has a cost of 2 million. That's right. And the uh, matrix has a cost of 10,000. The habitat has a cost of 10. And the nodes, which are green, also have a cost of 10, but they're the sort of the nodes that we're connecting in this example. Now we could take this and we could make an Excel sheet that's just like this, okay? And we could paste in uh, this little bit of information at the top and save this as a spatial reference for an ASCII file, and you could submit this into a Circuitscape analysis. But we're not going to do this today. I just wanted to make the point that it's not very far to go from just an Excel data sheet to an ASCII text file, which you can then submit to Circuitscape for analysis. But just to go back to this example, sorry, I did want to say that the information about how to run these analysis you can find at circuitscape.org. And I'm not going to go into details on the technical aspects of running these analyses, but happy to answer questions. And this is a good resource. So to go back to this example, the context of this example is that there's a road that is um, bisecting this landscape. Okay, that's the gray line with the cost of 2 million. And we can evaluate the effect of that road by doing analyses with and without it. So we could just delete the road and paste in matrix values if we wanted to and compare them. But we can also do things like evaluate different potential mitigations for the road. So we can create habitat. And in this example, I'm gonna elaborate on this in a moment. But in this example, the cost per cell, just for the purpose of this example, would be $1,000, and that would convert habitat. It would basically convert the matrix 10,000 to a habitat of 10. Okay, it's going to cost $1,000. If you had a certain budget, that's going to dictate how much of that you can do. We're going to make a wildlife passage, or we can make an ideal wildlife passage. Wildlife passage is basically converting the road to the matrix. The ideal wildlife passage is converting the road, a pixel on the road, to good habitat. And then we can place signs on the road. So there's things we can do in this schematic. So just to give you a couple of examples. So here is the landscape with no road. This is what it looks like if you run that Excel sheet. And the total pairwise resistance is 48,280 ohms. There's no road. If you have the road in there, the total pairwise is 84,166 ohms. Okay. So now here's the question. If you have a budget of $100,000, what is the best strategy to deal with this road on this landscape? You can either create habitat. It's $1,000 a cell, and you can then convert 100 matrix cells from 10,000 to 10. You can create a wildlife passage. In fact, you can do 10 passages. So that converts 10 road cells from 2 million to 10,000. You can do an ideal wildlife passage, which is uh, converting 2 road cells from it's $50,000 a cell. So you can only do 2, and it will create those that will convert those from 2 million to 10. And you can put signs up to reduce speed. And there you can put signs in 100 road cells. So I'm just going to maybe leave it there for a second and let people think about it. And um, Steve, I don't know whether people are able to speak if they had a question or if they wanted to weigh in with an opinion.
Yes, people are more than welcome to speak, actually. You just have to unmute yourself. I've got no
Okay.
restrictions on this, other than if you get out of hand, I mute you. But it's a good
Yeah.
crowd. So yes,
Okay.
anybody can contribute if you want to. Just feel free to unmute yourself, turn your camera on if you want to, and you can actually moot some ideas here to Brett with regard to this. So
Anyone have any initial thoughts about or questions about this? Okay.
Quiet crowd so far, man.
Okay. That's okay. That's okay. Um, we'll give people one more minute and they would like to weigh in with a thought. Otherwise, I will move forward.
Jeff, I'll have one sort of brief question. When you use these numbers, and of course, I think they're nice, accurate. How high would you go on something like an ideal wildlife passage, for example, and the cost to cell modification? You got 50,000 there. Would you go like much higher in some? I'm just thinking about some of the places where it gets really expensive, like in actual dollars to do it, and then also in terms of just, if you think about it in terms of cost, in terms of metabolic costs.
Yeah, I honestly would not know, and it's not. I think these numbers are made up, you know.
Yeah, they're contrived.
So
I get that. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I think in an ideal situation, you would be able to evaluate. You would have a budget,
Yep.
and you would you would actually know the cost of building a wildlife passage
Yep.
relative to your overall budget, and then you could use these analyses to factor in, to consider different scenarios, which is, I think, is sort of the point I'm making here,
Yeah. Yeah,
even
that
though
makes
these numbers
sense.
are not real.
Yeah, no, but it's a good point. And if you mentioned Circuitscape, of course, driving this too. For those of you who haven't used it, although I'm talking to a rather awesome crowd here, but still, I mean, they've got a whole series of what late Brad McCrae called gnarly landscape mail tools and things like that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do to try to modify this stuff too. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Just one more chance if anybody wants to weigh in. Otherwise, we'll move on.
Okay.
Okay. So I do have some answers here. So let me move on to the next slide. Um, if you were to create habitat, if you were to create habitat, uh, so th this is like option one. Your total pairwise resistance is 73,000 ohms. If you create wildlife passages, so 10 wildlife passages, you can see where the current density crosses the road in this example, 52,000. If you create an ideal wildlife passage, you actually can create two of them, 56,000. And uh, the signs to reduce speed is less effective, according to this analysis. So when you look overall, it's creating a wildlife passages is the 10 wildlife passages is the best solution among these alternatives. There may be other alternatives, but in this case, just to show you how this works in this little example, um, you can see that creating 10 wildlife passages is the best solution. Okay, so just would like now to move forward to some of the work that we've done, including the parks and protected areas indicator. So um, as many of you will know, there was a COP15 biodiversity agreement recently, which includes in Goal A, having an enhanced uh, uh, degree of connectivity and maintained, enhanced, or restored, I should say. And so implicitly, we would like to be able to measure connectivity, right? And so this is what kind of where our work comes in. We wondered how can we make a map of connectivity across Canada to help support this type of goal. Relatedly, at the same time, there has been a Government of Canada initiative called the National Program for Ecological Corridors, which is a Parks Canada initiative. And some colleagues and I became aware of this initiative, and we knew about the Goal A um, agreement. And so we set out on this what we call the Pan-Canadian Connectivity Project, and we had a small team, including Paul O'Brien, who did a lot of the work that I'm going to show in this presentation. Angela Brennan, Richard Pither, Kristen Hirsch-Pearson. And this was kind of in some ways a bit of a COVID project that we were doing mostly online during sort of the latter stages of the pandemic. This is our cost map, which is a 300-meter resolution cost map of Canada. And this has four costs, so it's different than the three cost map that I showed you, but it's conceptually the same. This is a map that is shown, it's basically a naturalness map, and it's basically uh, considers that natural cover um, is low cost. And so it's modeling connectivity for terrestrial species that use natural cover. You can see the details here. And I will mention too that the data for this cost map can be acquired at the website of the information is available, a link to the paper it's published, as you can see the reference here. It's all open access paper and data. We use 17 tiles to model the whole country. So I mentioned that tiles can be stitched together. It's a big country. And so it's very computer intensive to run the whole country at once. And so we use a bunch of tiles. And when I say we, I mean Paul pretty much did this work. And this was the mapping that was done here is all pretty much exclusively done in R. And there's a version of Circuitscape which is run in Julia, which allows parallel processing and is quite fast. And that's what we use for this analysis. Those tiles include buffers, and so they we're using a type of connectivity measure that involves placing nodes in the buffers. And this was our map. So this is the Pan-Canadian connectivity map. This is a 300-meter resolution map. You can see areas with high probability of movement are in red and the low is in blue. And so you can see lots of regions of very high kind of connectivity that you might consider form types of corridors. Like a good example here is the Chignecto Isthmus, which is clearly a kind of corridor between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Many other features like that. You can see them when you zoom in, like, for example, the Cascade Mountains. The Y-to-Y region has lots of current flow through it. Cypress Hills in Ontario, you can see the A to A region is here. And there's several other features of interest in Ontario. Um, Zoomed in, lots of flow around Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. And again, there's the A to A region. We have used data that is uh, available through colleagues and either available through MoveBank or collaborators that are GPS telemetry data that we have used to validate in attempts to validate this map. And we've seen pretty good fit generally with so the red coefficients here are cases where there's positive uh, fit between predictions of movements based on telemetry data and based on uh, current density. And we can use those information, the validation to kind of like because it's a multi-species map, we can kind of identify the scope of the I guess the pool of species that this multi-species map applies to, because we have kind of taken an approach where we consider this large basket of species that use natural cover to be modeled by this cost service. And so now we can actually validate and see which ones it applies to. We wanted to understand whether we could use connectivity to identify nature-based climate solutions. So we have done some work on this question, and we have taken advantage of this paper by Soth et al., which provides terrestrial carbon maps for Ontario, both forest carbon and soil carbon. And we can make these choropleth maps where we're comparing current density to forest carbon or soil carbon, finding that in this top 25th percentile, this dark brown is kind of like places with high current density and high forest carbon. So these are places that we can consider to be um, um, kind of like wins for both types of variables if we're able to account for them and uh, include them in our planning. This paper was published in 2023. There's a map of forest carbon and connectivity, kind of the dark brown are these areas that have high values for both metrics. And there's soil carbon as well. So we have this map of soil carbon and current density. Okay, you can see that you can identify currently protected areas that have and how the current protected areas are kind of overlapping with these areas of high carbon and high current density. And you can see that, for example, there are 12% of the highest 25th percentile current and forest carbon pixels are covered by the current protected areas strategy. 1% of the soil carbon. Okay, so the next thing that we did in this project was to just try to develop an indicator of protected areas connectivity, and we were approached to do this by Karen Hartley and others at MECP, and we have struck up this team of people to work on this project, and that's what I'm going to speak about now. So the work that I've been showing so far is using this concept of omnidirectional connectivity, where the points are moved out of the buffer. But as you recall, I mentioned before, you could also have point-based connectivity, where the nodes are inside the map. And this is kind of, as you can see, or as you kind of intuitively, more appropriate for parks and protected areas network connectivity, because we're trying to actually connect the parks and protected areas, which are physical locations, and we know the start and end and destination, so we can identify nodes on the map that we want to connect. And so this is the approach that we're taking here. It's, intuitively very similar. It's just where are you placing the nodes that differs in this type of approach. And more specifically, we came up with this concept of sentinel nodes because we recognize that if the parks and protected areas network is changing over time, the very fact that parks may or may be added, or the number of protected areas is changing over time, causes a problem with the indicator, because you get a conflation, a confounding between space and time if you don't have a fixed network. And so we decided to use this sentinel node idea, which is basically a subset of protected areas that can be considered a fixed network that we can use to assess changes over time. So this breaks apart this conflation between space and time. And so this is what the approach we have taken. And we're interested in this value called mean pairwise effective resistance. And so this is the pairwise measure. We're kind of less interested in the current density measure for this indicator, because we really want to use the mean pairwise effective resistance, or MPER, as our indicator value. So we first wanted to know how many sentinel nodes we need. It's fine to come up with this idea of sentinel nodes, but it assumes that you can accurately reflect the network with a subset of nodes. And so we did some work, and again, when I say we, this is Paul's work, where we basically would randomly draw 2 nodes and do a connectivity analysis, and then randomly draw 3, randomly draw 4, and so on. And as you continue to do that, you find that the correlation coefficient between measures levels off, and the mean pairwise effective resistance value kind of gets another regression to the mean type of situation. So basically, you're getting to stable results after about 50 nodes. So our conclusion is that you can use a subset of nodes of 50 nodes, and that will answer your question. And so really, that was our answer. We need 50 nodes. And just to show you in more detail how this works, we did a little experiment, and just again, this is in Eastern Ontario in an area. And so here we've randomly selected protected areas, and we've randomly selected sentinel nodes in this area, placed sentinel nodes in these protected areas. And so we do a connectivity analysis. We run Circuitscape through this area, this set of kind of randomly selected sentinel nodes in Eastern Ontario. We come up with a mean pairwise effective resistance of 49.58 ohms. And then we can play around with this landscape now. We can make a development. So we simulate a 157 kilometer squared development in this area. And um, again, we can run Circuitscape through there. And the simulated development basically amounts to us converting the pixels into the high costs, right, in the middle of the map. And this produces an MPER value of 49.65 ohms. Likewise, we can place a park. So here we've placed a um, uh, we've basically invented a park and placed it down in this part of the map. And this park, the parks in this analysis have the lowest cost. So we can rerun the analysis now. And with this new park in there, it's not a node, mind you, because we have a fixed set of nodes. So we're not adding nodes to the map. We're just adding parks that don't have nodes. And we get the result of 49.57 ohms. So when you put that all together, what you see is that just as you would expect when you have a new park, you're getting the lowest resistance value. And when you have the development, you're getting the highest resistance value. So essentially, our indicator is working the way that we think it should. It's sensitive enough to pick up these changes, even in this relatively small area. And this is what our sentinel node looks like. This was published in 2023 as well. So this is Ontario's sentinel node network. There are 50 nodes that are kind of systematically placed across the province inside parks and protected areas. And we have this map, which has 5 costs. The lowest cost, 0.1, is the cost inside parks and protected areas. And this is what the current density map looks like for this analysis. It's quite similar. It's actually quite highly correlated with the Pither et al. Pan-Canadian map current density, but it's not perfectly correlated because the nodes are placed inside the map, right? So there's some differences due to that. But in general, it's the same cost map, with the exception that we have given the parks lower protected areas. I'm sorry, we have given the parks lower costs. The correlation between these two maps is 0.76. And so our idea is that we can reevaluate this metric over time to evaluate how the indicator is changing and to evaluate, how well connected the parks and protected areas network is. And this having this kind of indicator will allow goals to be achieved related to, connectivity, because we can measure it in a consistent way over time. We can also look at the isolation of individual sentinel nodes. So here in this example on the right, you can see northing is on the x-axis, sentinel node isolation is on the y-axis. So we call this the node isolation index. And that simply involves, for each of the sentinel nodes, evaluating the mean pairwise effective resistance between that node and all other nodes. So you can kind of make a node-specific estimate, and you can see how those nodes vary. So not surprisingly, these places like Mara Provincial Park, Ferris Provincial Park are in the south, and places up in the north are generally better connected to the other nodes. And that's what you see here. It's got this kind of shape to it because of the shape of the province, basically. So the next thing that we wanted to do was to understand whether we could take this network that we now have, this network of 50 nodes, and build a model that will allow us to predict the future placement of parks and how well those, I don't mean to predict the future placement of parks, but to predict how connected a future park is based on its characteristics and how well it contributes to network connectivity. So that's the goal of this model. And so basically what this involves, we have this map of our nodes, and just kind of conceptually, you can add another park to the map. and reassess the connectivity and the MPER value. And you can calculate then what we call delta MPER for each iteration. So every time you add a park, you get a different value than the kind of baseline value. And you can calculate that delta MPER value, do it again, and keep recalculating it. And then over time, you have this response variable, which we call delta MPER, which is all these simulated parks that we've added to the landscape, and a bunch of predictor variables that we're interested in evaluating. So we can see what predictor variables contribute to delta MPER. So we have done this now, and this is the table of regression results, essentially. And the bold values are the ones that are not overlapping zero, basically. Um, uh, so like edge to area ratio, for example, having a small edge to area ratio is good. So more circular parks are better. Distance to center. So being close to the center of the province is good. It contributes more to the network connectivity. And that's not surprising because travel paths are always going to be moving through the center more often than moving through the edge. Having a park that is close to a node in the network is also good. Having in some ways, those are perhaps less interesting than these two values, which is to say that having a park in a place with a lot of anthropogenic disturbance around it, not inside the park, but around the park, is good. So that increases your delta MPR value. And likewise, having a park without a lot of anthropogenic disturbance inside it is also good. So to be able to find places that are kind of in a matrix of anthropogenic disturbance but are not themselves disturbed, I think that is kind of the best scenario for contributing to connectivity. And so we've evaluated candidate parks, and you can see here the top 5% of candidate parks are in the north, more than the bottom 5%, which tend to be kind of clustered more in the south. So generally speaking, that speaks something about how these kind of simulated candidate parks contribute to the network connectivity. Okay, so here, just to remind you, this is our pan-Canadian connectivity map. And I'm just going to take a quick little tangent here and mention that in 2022, for example, we have identified 17 deer in southwestern Ontario that were positive for SARS-CoV-2, and genomic sequencing of the virus demonstrated connections. The most recent common ancestor of this virus was mink farms in Michigan. So there's some kind of connection between this spread of this virus into deer in southwestern Ontario and mink in Michigan. And so that's a connectivity question in some ways. And so it's kind of interesting to think about how can we use connectivity to help kind of do risk assessments for spread of pathogens and for surveillance of pathogens. Likewise, there were deer SARS-CoV-2 cases in Quebec in the eastern townships, and the most recent common ancestor for these cases, these little red dots, were human cases in Vermont. Again, just across the border, and so some suggestion of spread from south to north. Likewise, there's lots of cases of avian influenza moving back and forth across the border. And so these are all examples where it would be useful to have some transboundary connectivity information. And so we decided that we would take on this question and see whether we could use the same methods to develop a connectivity mapping in the US and come up with a seamless Canada-US map that we could use for these purposes and also for conservation purposes. And this is a group of us that worked on this project. So we have extended our cost map into the USA. This is exactly the same cost map as the Pither paper, so the Pan-Canadian map. So we basically tried to replicate the types of data and the resolutions of data that we used in the Canadian context. And we used, in this case, again, tiles. So here's the tiles that were used to map the US, including some big Alaskan tiles. And this is the 300-meter resolution omnidirectional connectivity map of Canada and the US, which we have just produced. And this work is not yet published. It's something that we're currently working on. Just to give you some examples, though, we have really clearly three corridors that connect high current density across the border between Ontario and states in the US. There's this Arrowhead region in Minnesota, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and then the 808 region. And I think it's just a nice kind of demonstration of the map that these are areas that also really connect bobcat gene flow into Ontario. Just some separate work that I've been doing. It's a type of validation. And as another example, we have used locations of these SARS-CoV-2 positive deer to we've evaluated current density in proximity of these positive cases. Then you can see, generally speaking, that the current density is higher around the locations where there were positive deer than around random locations. So there's again, some example of a type of validation, at least a kind of case study of the application of this type of work. I think that's my last slide. Yes, it is. And so I'd like to thank Steve for the opportunity to give this presentation and all kinds of collaborators on this work. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'll be happy to take any questions otherwise. Thank you.
And thank you, Jeff. For all of our assembled colleagues here, you can ask anything of Jeff or sort of initiate a discussion. We will go as far as and long as we need to, but I don't want to sort of pressure anybody. Thanks, Jeff, for that excellent presentation. Again, there's a couple of things I put into the chat, which covered the Pither et al. Paper, one of the things Jeff was mentioning, and there's actually a link from PLOS One, which that paper is published to the data. I recognize a lot of you have seen it. Some of you are actually even on the paper sometimes, actually, when I get the audiences. So that is in the chat if you want to see it. Beyond that, I'll turn it over to the audience, and I will moderate any particular discussion or questions.
I will also just make the point that if people, I see, wait a second. If people would like to contact me later, if they think of a question, I'm happy to answer questions over email in the
Absolutely.
future.
Just watching to make sure I'm not missing anybody with their hands up. If for some reason I am missing you with hands up, because of course the chat screen and everything that kind of it's interfering, just unmute yourself and ask. Don't stand on authority here or anything like that. One of the things I'll ask you, Jeff, actually, just to get things a little bit started, and then I'll turn it back over to the audience. Is that I mean, a lot of your papers that this whole project got a lot of traction. I mean, it's only been a few years, and yet there's like on the Pither et al. Paper, there's like if you actually look at it closely, there's 22 citations already, which is amazing. Only two of them are self citations, but I mean, Richard actually cited one of them in his paper, 2024 paper he wrote with a couple of the folks in there as well. Where do you want to see this go? I mean, as somebody who did all this work with all your colleagues and other colleagues have actually been on this too, where do you want to see this go next? I know the project's kind of sunsetting, but you've got other ambitions, I'm sure.
Well, in my opinion, it's I guess a resource that's available to be used, and I hope people are able to use it if they need it. That's one thing I would say, and that's why we have taken steps to make sure everything is um, um, available. Uh, and in addition to that, I think that there are repeatable methods there.
Yeah.
And so other jurisdictions can use those methods to do similar work if they would consider it beneficial. So I do think that there's value in the method and the approach, and that um, uh, so I guess I would like to see it used in that respect. And I am aware that there are certain jurisdictions that are using the approach,
Yep.
so that's good.
Yeah, no, I think it's something that there's a bunch of us that have talked about this. I'm not as you guys are, and some of you folks actually on the thing as sort of the expert in connectivity. I mean, I use it kind of peripherally in my restoration because I'm not the expert, but it's one of the things that's been spread out there when I've gone to meetings with the UN and things like that. Is that hey, we've actually got a map thanks to these guys, about sort of connectivity across the country, which I think is one of the reasons why people should be using it. I mean, it's something that you say is repeatable methods. And I remember when you sort of first published it, and then you talked a little bit about it at one of our meetings too. It reminded me of actually watching Brad McRae originally develop these ideas on that became Circuitscape actually in real time 25, 20 years ago, I guess now. And so it's kind of interesting watching that unfold. So that's sort of useful too. Are there other questions? Oh, there we go. Karen's got a question. Karen, please go ahead. Take the floor.
Yeah, so just a comment to start off with, I guess. So, yeah, I just wanted to mention that we are just beginning to start to use these tools that Jeff and Paul developed for looking at candidate sites for Ontario parks. And yeah, it's really gratifying. I don't know if that's the right word, but to be able to make kind of these quantitative comparisons between sites and to look at connectivity in sort of a systematic and quantitative fashion, whereas previously it was really very qualitatively based. So I think that we're going to continue to use these tools, and yeah, they've been useful to us just already. I did have a question, Jeff, just looking at your Canada-US map and where you highlighted the significant corridors, those three areas in Ontario between US and Ontario. And have you do you see those areas as potentially being focal areas for international efforts to try to uh, protect or enhance connectivity? Or what are your thoughts there?
Um, to protect or enhance, you kind of cut out when you finish your question. International efforts to protect or enhance biodiversity, is that what you said? I'm assuming that's what you said. So I will say that um an example of that is the A2A. There's very clearly it's an NGO, but there's clearly some international cooperation across the border. There's lots of work that's being done across those two jurisdictions of Ontario and New York, and also federal counterparts on both sides and provincial state counterparts uh, to kind of foster some integrated conservation and land use planning across that region. So I think that's an example where there is. So I do think those types of places across the whole country can serve as places for that kind of transboundary um, uh, kind of cooperation.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Jeff. Are there other questions that folks would like to ask while we're here? As Jeff says, you can contact him. Several of you are colleagues with Jeff, obviously. So there's probably a pretty easy way to do it as well. And I'll go around once and twice here, going once, going twice, and sold, I think, actually. I think Jeff, we've covered it for today. Actually, again, I know a
Okay.
lot of you have worked with Jeff or seen this. However, it's been really nice. And Jeff, one of the things I want to compliment you on, especially, I've always liked that Excel example you give, because it shows you, as you say, exactly how straightforward at a very basic level this can be. I actually use something like it in one of my classes just to show them because, you kind of get them familiar with all this whole thing. It's really tough to do that in 12 weeks, obviously, right, to get that
Yeah.
level. But it really helps the students like see, like you take an Excel file, I'd make one up, and it's like you can actually sort of, as you say, call Circuitscape and give it, get an analysis of it.
For sure.
So I think one of the benefits of is, as you said, is the replicability. And Karen, I think you hit the nail on the head too. It and a lot of other work in the last 10 years plus has taken it from being a very qualitative, and that was fine, discussion into a quantitative one. So I really think that's great. That's wonderful. I'm going to thank everybody. We're going to get some found time here, which is expected. We gave it extra time just in case, actually, but as I say, we figured it's going to be about an hour, and here we are. Thank you, Jeff, very much for presenting and for everybody for attending. This recording will be available probably towards the end of the week at the latest, and so you'll be able to see it at the Casiopa site. And if you go to the Casiopa site, there's a YouTube connector at the very top. You can just click on that. It'll take you to all the videos, including this one. So thanks, Jeff, and thanks everybody else.
Great. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you.